Hi, I'm Dr. Honora Wall, and my current position is as the founder and CEO of EducalcLearning.com, a company that creates materials for students with dyscalculia and trains educators in dyscalculia. I'm also the founder and executive director of the Dyscalculia Training and Research Institute, which is a nonprofit devoted to raising awareness and understanding of dyscalculia. For someone who had never heard of dyscalculia, I would say it is the math learning disability in the same family as dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and autism, and it impacts the way we understand, learn, and remember math. The age group and grade levels that I primarily work with are older students, high school, college, and adults who have the math learning disability. I do have experience working with younger students, but most of my time is spent with older students and with adults. The leading indicator of dyscalculia for a person of any age is not knowing or being comfortable with their basic facts, even the twos times tables, fives, and the tens. Those can be very difficult to remember. And people with dyscalculia of any age get very uncomfortable when people start talking about numbers or about math. They almost have an instant withdrawal from the topic or a panic response. They're very uncomfortable talking about math or numbers in any way. Another few indicators that are very common for people with dyscalculia at any age, uh, being uncomfortable with telling time, using traditional clocks, or understanding time, elapsed time. If an appointment starts at 2 in the afternoon, or if we're leaving the house in 30 minutes, what does that actually mean? That can be very difficult. Money, anything to do with money, counting change, budgeting, understanding that if a budget is written out on paper and I have so much money in the bank, what does that mean when I go to the grocery store? How much can I buy? How much do I need to hold on to because rent is coming up soon? What do I need in order to make a large purchase? Any of those financial conversations are very difficult. Another indicator in the classroom is a student who can become comfortable with a concept, but the numeracy piece is in their way. So they might understand what slope means, or they might understand what graphing a line means, but they don't really know how to work with the numbers in order to successfully answer problems on a worksheet or have a discussion in class. I would say another indicator of dyscalculia as compared to, let's say, low numeracy or weak math foundation would be a student who can add, but they have a harder time subtracting. They can multiply, but they have a harder time dividing. They can work with exponents, but that doesn't seem to be related to finding roots. So forward math is one thing. Backward math, that inverse operation, is an entirely different conversation. So people with dyscalculia don't really develop that idea of a fact family or understanding the inverse of different operations. I take a very pragmatic lens when I work with people of any age. So we use a lot of support tools to take care of that numeracy piece. That might be a multiplication list, not the chart, the old-fashioned times tables, or it might be a calculator based on their age. By the time someone is in fifth grade, I really start moving them onto a calculator for the numbers piece because I need them to focus on the difference between perimeter, area, and volume and how that relates to a 2D or 3D shape, let's say. I can't have them lose the concept because they're lost in the basic facts. Now, using the calculator or a multiplication list or even a 1 to 100s chart is not intuitive, so we need to train students how to use those tools properly. For older students, I also recommend that they work on how they write notes to themselves. which can be more of a narrative form rather than following a formula or even a worked example. Worked examples can sometimes help if we've taught the student how to use them as a memory trigger. But in any case, we want to have something to trigger the student's memory because that math information is kind of hiding in the parietal lobe, or it might have been lost altogether. Well, we can certainly see signs of dyscalculia for students who have problems understanding quantity or comparing or estimating. Rounding doesn't make a lot of sense. We can see it in loss of math facts, even after interventions, after practicing flashcards forever. These facts still aren't sticking. We can see it a lot in students if they're performing a grade level or two behind their peers. Funnily enough, people with dyscalculia can and should do grade level work at all times. If they have the right accommodations and supports, they can, and they can do this very successfully. Without those accommodations and supports, they typically perform math usually two grade levels behind their peers. And the gold standard would be to use a neuropsych evaluation to really dig down deep into subitizing, into IQ, into visual, spatial, and working memory skills, and getting a much more comprehensive picture of the neurological development of that student. It's hard to get those evaluations sometimes, so we use other indicators in the classroom. I would say the most common barriers to math success that I see for students who have dyscalculia is that they're not getting the right interventions or accommodations in class, especially during those assessments. So if they're doing all right in classwork, maybe holding their own but not doing great in homework, they've lost the information by the time they take a quiz or a test, and they don't have any memory triggers. They don't have any external support. It's like asking someone to do a reading comprehension test not wearing their glasses, or to make it from the classroom out to the PE field and there's no ramp for their wheelchair. So that's where we have a barrier. There are systemic things in the classroom that don't allow these students to really show what they know, especially in a timed situation, in an assessment that produces anxiety, um, or also having that paper and pencil or computer based assessment. Oral assessments can be much easier for students with dyscalculia. So if a teacher is not giving or grading alternative assessments, or if they are weighing tests very heavily versus classwork or homework, those are some real barriers that are external that we can change for students. I would like K-12 schools to understand that dyscalculia is a learning disorder. It's a type of neurodivergence. It's a different way of thinking, coding, and recalling math information. It has nothing to do with a teacher or the environment. It's part of the way that student thinks. Of course, it can be impacted by the classroom, by environmental circumstances, but that's not the root issue. It's just a different way of thinking. Very similar to a person who might have some health issues versus a person who has type 1 diabetes. We can have different conversations about what to do for their health if we know exactly what the problem is. And dyscalculia is very similar. The way I wish K-12 schools would address dyscalculia is to give the right interventions and most especially the right accommodations, because then students can do grade level work. They can stay in a gen ed classroom. They can keep up with their peers. They can access and complete higher level math. They can get into and complete college as long as they have the right support. The way I would like higher ed institutions to understand dyscalculia is to know that this is a lifelong condition. We do not outgrow dyscalculia the same way we don't outgrow being nearsighted or having type 1 diabetes. We simply accommodate and support throughout the lifespan. So even in higher ed, We may take fewer math or science courses, but we need the same accommodations. And currently, the accommodations we typically offer are not appropriate for these students, and it creates a real barrier to completing a college degree, especially in their chosen field, and it limits career options and lifetime earnings for people with dyscalculia. The way I would like higher ed institutions to address dyscalculia is to have their math and science professors take some PD in what the learning disorders are: dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and understand why the accommodations are important and what the appropriate accommodations are. Understanding that their institution can go a long way towards supporting students in very easy ways that go beyond just sending someone to a testing lab that's not very appropriate for these students. What do I feel is the most important issue facing students with dyscalculia? I would say a lot of it is the lack of awareness or lack of understanding on the part of the systems that they're in. Students need to pass their math class. They need to pass Friday's test. They need to take Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry, and then either pre-calc or statistics. And statistics is a beautiful class for people with dyscalculia. It's very straightforward, and we already use a lot of the accommodations that are appropriate for these students. The most important problem area for people with dyscalculia is elementary math. By the time we get into middle school, high school, and upper level math, those topics are much easier for students with dyscalculia in my experience. And performing in upper level math classes is much more achievable than performing grade level content in elementary. But there are a lot of topics we teach in elementary school that we do not address again in middle school and high school. And they've already created a barrier that keeps our students out of upper level math classes. And that systemic design is what I would say is the most important issue facing students with dyscalculia. Luckily, we can change it very easily, and these students can have a lot of success. My favorite dyscalculia researchers, um, sadly, I wish there were more to name, but there are a few who have paved the way. Brian Butterworth, Daniel Ansari, Michelle Mazzocco. Um, those are some of the big ones. Dehane, Geary. These are names that will come up a lot in a Google Scholar search for dyscalculia. There are some new and modern up and coming researchers. John Tay Myers, Katie Lewis are two prominent ones in the United States. And the big thing I would say is that a lot of our published research at this time comes from outside of the United States. So we really have a call to action for anyone in education who's looking to do more research. Please come into the neurodivergent sphere and help us increase the amount of published research. But if you go to Google Scholar and you start looking at different resources, you will see familiar names that come up repeatedly. Again, Butterworth, Ansari, Dehane, Geary, Mazzocco. There are a few others, but those researchers form the basis for all of our work in dyscalculia. It's actually very easy to help people who have dyscalculia. Uh, it just needs to be the right kind of help. And that is the piece that we want to get to as educators. It's not very difficult. It's not time consuming. It just takes a paradigm shift in the way we traditionally think of a good math student or great math performance. And how do we get there? We need to understand that people with dyscalculia don't develop an internal number line the way typically developing people develop an internal number line. So when we use outside supports, 1 to 100s chart, manipulatives, multiplication list, calculator, guided notes, reference sheet, we're just giving something external that typically developing students already use internally. And that's kind of the luck of the draw. Dyscalculia is usually genetic. It can run in families, and it's just something that we are born with, the same way we're born with brown eyes or blue eyes, or being tall or short, or nearsighted or farsighted, or having a tendency for developing diabetes or a heart condition. We are born with our genetics, and they determine a lot of our development. And then understanding our genetics helps us accommodate our development so that we can be most successful. That's really the piece that I would like to see schools get to when they're helping students with dyscalculia. Understand what it is, know how to address it and support it, and then students will take off. Students with dyscalculia are usually very intelligent, they're very quick. Depending on the person, they could have very strong working memory skills, very strong visual spatial skills, or very strong adaptive skills and very creative skills. Again, that's depending on the person. Not everyone with dyscalculia is suddenly creative. That's a bias around neurodivergence, and we want to be careful with those biased understandings. So get to know your student, find their strengths and weaknesses. They will have more strengths than you think they do, and you just want to assess them in the way that's most appropriate for them. And if anyone wants to reach me for more information about my thoughts or my approach or the research that I use for my opinions, I can be reached at Honora, Honora, at thedtri.org. I'm also on a lot of social media platforms. I have a support group for teachers on Facebook, and I have a podcast, What in the World is Dyscalculia? And you can hear that pretty much anywhere. And that way I try to give as much free information as I can to raise awareness and understanding of the math learning disability.